Right, we've started the discussion. We've looked at the philosophy. Now it's time to dive into the history. But before we do that, right, I want to keep the, thoughts going. So, to make a point, Blitz, we'll start here. Right? Sorry, that's not Blitz. Blitz, we'll start here. Okay, so we just had Kasai and Kano LL, right? Ira, significantly close. Dorinthia, kind of close. Dash, kind of close, and so forth and so on. Now, it's 4 points per skirmish event. Looking at the listings, from now till Sunday, right? This is the 125th event listed, and obviously, I'm not done counting. So, there are more than enough events for one Blitz hero to LL every single week. Now, that might not happen, right? Because hopefully the metas are varied and people are bringing different heroes to each event. And depending on, how popular it is, what's going on at that local LGS, you will have a diverse range of heroes. But it is going to trickle down, right? Eventually, LL, then spread across everyone else. And we could see, up to 9, potentially, if not more, heroes LL before we get heavy hitters. And with heavy hitters, we have 3 to 6, right? Because I think the go currently is 3 new, 3 old. But yeah, anywhere from 3 to 6 new heroes if we get young variants, right? So 9 out, 6 in. And then we have to wait for the next set and the next set and 3 sets a year with only 15 heroes, right? There are 52 weeks in a year. And this is just skirmish events, right? So what, are we going to see another tweak, another point change? It feels to me, right off rip, that while they might have a plan, they were a bit preemptive with all the changes. I feel like we should have seen what the plan is before we got these changes, right? Obviously, we know heroes are coming. We know that X is going to happen. X cards are going to be featured in the expansion slot to try and create better matchups and yada yada, affect the meta. But all that is after this, right? After the new point changes are going to say, and straightforward, do their damage. So just a little food for thought there, right? It could get crazy if everyone does just net deck, play the top decks as they go in and out. We could see a huge range of heroes just gone off the skirmish events because of 4 points. And that's not to mention class constructor or anything like that. And then the other point I did want to raise and think about, LL. Should a hero ever come off it? Think about all the potential matchups we will never get to see because X hero LL when this other hero didn't even exist. While the Living Legend format is going to facilitate that, right? We do have to wait for X heroes to then go to Living Legend, see if they are actually even able to, be part of the show. And yeah, it's just a curious thought, right? Would you want to see any of these, pop up back in Classic Constructed just to see what the cool matchups could be? But I do think on this point more so that obviously Living Legend, it's just a matter of when. Anyway, that aside, history. So, right back in 2020, right? This was the first big change because they went from this original idea of Living Legend being granted at the top 8 of World Championship to the first point iteration. Now, if I get any of this wrong, let me know. I have sort of tried to find all the articles, but it's 5 years. Cut me some slack. But so we went from the possibility of up to 8 heroes cycling out every single year, right? At this point in time, we were only getting 8 heroes for Classic Constructed, to now the Roll of Honor entries, right? So professional level events, the calling, national championships, world championships would grant only the winner a Roll of Honor entry, right? And then once they got to 10, they would LL. So that significantly changed the pacing, if you will, for heroes to hit LL and be removed from play. But it's just interesting to me, that mentality, right? If this was their goal from the get-go, again, potentially all 8, right? If for whatever reason, it was able for everyone to pick a separate hero, this could have had devastating effects. But at the same time, we generally see, 3 to 4 maybe So it's still half of the yearly's amount of heroes that come into existence being removed with this iteration of the Living Legend status. So potentially was their idea, to introduce a lot more heroes. I mean, 4 is kind of more than what we get now, right? Most sets feature 3 in terms of them being new, but it is just a curious thing to look back retrospectively, like what was the plan for this, right? But it is a massive dip. Again, potentially 8 to now having to win 10 professional level events across all the heroes, as more heroes were obviously coming in and coming out. Then we get to the first real point iteration. And, well, this is a nice long post explaining it and explaining their goals, starting off that everyone would be retroactively given points, which is another concept to sort of float. It'd be really hard to obviously figure out, but I mean, they could twist and do whatever they want, in all honesty, with the Living Legend system, if they were to, retroactively enforce the point changes across the board, right? Obviously, it'd be really complicated, but they could, if that was their overall goal. If they wanted to, bump up the amount of heroes allowed, if they wanted to increase the points, they could easily, look at all the competitions, look at all the event listings, and retroactively award points. But we get the first iteration of the leaderboards, right? So Katsu, Dash, and Dorinthia getting their nice fancy points from their events. And then, of course, Blitz as well, with the Skirmish, interestingly, being at 3 points, right? So currently at 4, 3. It does make a huge difference. Again, 125 events versus back then, oh God, you're going to make me do the math, aren't you? 133, 166. Yeah, you're right. Is it 166? I think it's 166. But in that perspective, Flesh and Blood was also not grown to the extent it is now, and it's not growing at the rate it is growing now. So 3 versus 4 is a huge difference, even though we're more in line with these points with the current iteration. The growth of the game and the level of competitive play is completely different. The amount of events being run, obviously not at the top end, but more so at the bottom end, right? That they will amount to a substantial change. So for perspective, right? So Worlds, 300 points is what we sit at now. Same with the Pro Tour. And calling 100, National Champs is 100 now instead of 80 with the most recent changes. The above 48 is now above 96, but 40 and 40. Below 96 is now that 20. So they're exactly the same. It's just the amount of players, which does, again, accommodate for that level of growth. Not enough, I think, in all honesty, right? I think the game has grown significantly more than, 100%. In 3 years, right? This is 2021. No, 2 years. 2021. Yeah. The Road to Nationals is 4 now, so it's slightly less. The Pro Quest is 4 now, so it's slightly less. But again, the big one being Skirmishes being 4. Again, having a huge impact because of the amount of events that are run, right? Skirmishes are really the open-ended one. Now, interestingly, the idea is that Blitz are the casual event, right? So we should see more heroes in Blitz across the board, and I would be interested to see if we see that throughout the year, with that 15 heroes being more like, I don't know, like 4 class constructed and then 9 for Blitz or something like that, to again accommodate the point changes. It's those sort of breakdowns that I really wish we would get and we would understand, because it is going to be a quick cycle at this current rate through the heroes of Blitz. And if it's a casual event, I feel like limiting what people can play is worse, right? Because, well, they probably will be funneled to the new products, which is good in some aspects, but then variety and learning and developing the skills across the board for then, maybe move into class constructed. There are, other implications that do have some negative effects. And then, of course, the next big change came in Fab 2.0, right, in 2022. So currently speaking, we are getting roughly a major change every single year, right? Which is fine. Again, the game is going to go through growing pains. But again, it sort of feels like the type of thing to, flesh out more for introducing, right? What would be the harm of, again, not focusing on bans and erratas, and then introducing the Living Legend system once everything that's needed to make it functional to its best ability was already in play. Again, more competitive deck matchups, right? So instead of having a top-heavy meta, right, have ways for, different heroes to share the spotlight, have a bit more spread and diversity rather than what we see. Have that larger pool of heroes to then tackle with this speedy changeover, but I would fully expect, we still see a large number of changes to the Living Legend status, because it is going to go through the motions, because it is, again, a developing thing, right? I still am under this belief that they've squashed down, like 20 years of development into 5 years, 4 years for Flesh and Blood. But the big change in Fab 2.0 was weapons, right? So what's a hero without their trusty and other matters of becoming a legend? So they take their signature weapon with them. And this is probably the change I like least, personally, right? I can understand its thematics, right? And to some degree, its rationale, but we have a huge diversity of weapons, right? We have heroes that are dependent on their weapons, we have archetypes dependent on the weapons, and then we have just weapons that, fit a build or just there for being the best in slot, right? But they don't see that much functional play. So for instance, Prism with Old Luminaris, right? That's a harsh thing to do, especially, again, when you look at rarity of weapons too, right? Luminaris being majestic versus a lot of them being, token weapons, or being in the rare slot, or being in the common slot, right? And it's that level of just disparity between different weapons that I don't like this change, right? I mean, there are good aspects to it, obviously. Rosetta Thorn being removed from all Rune Blades was seen as pretty much a win, right? Because it's good in Briar, it's good in everyone, it's good in... So why should it see that its multitude of play, right? But then again, it's Teklo Vossen, for whatever reason, if he gets LL, right? He has the one Evo weapon. So unless we see another Evo weapon, right, that heavily impacts Evos. And then you have heroes like Vizette and Max who have specialized weapons, which is sort of what this should be to me, right? It should be them and their specialized weapons. And it's just confusing, right? Dawnblade for Dorinthia, if that goes, there are a lot of cards that directly affect Dawnblade. Are they going to make a third Dawnblade? Then, of course, you have all the future possibilities, right? If only this new version of Guardian had access to this weapon, and so forth and so on, that we will not be able to see in, again, the main competitive format, because they take them with them. So, again, I can understand the rationale. I'm just not fully on board with the stylization of weapons we've got, right? If they were all specializations, if they were, very much critical to every single hero in their playstyle, sure, that would make sense. But again, it's because we have just that whole field of, well, this is critical, this is just something flavorful, this is just, you use it because it's what you got, right? So to speak. And then, like, Icelander. How many decks actually used Kraken's Aether Vein? And at the same time, all the potential of Kraken's Aether Vein and its effect that we haven't seen fleshed out. Then, interesting, we have, well, this statement. Obviously, a critical mass of heroes needed to actually become Living Legend before launching the format. Not quite the case, right? I wouldn't call what we got a critical mass, so to speak. But nonetheless, it was necessary because so many cards were becoming restricted, so many valuable cards, right, were losing their edge because their utility was just forfeit. And again, it sort of feels like this is out of their hands because they're trying to shape it and steer it towards something, and the community and what we actually do with the competitive play, or the decks that end up, LLing and so forth, getting the most points, right, are fighting back to the overall direction they want it to go. And it's just, right, there are good things, there are bad things, but at times it just feels disjointed. After that, we have our next update, rationalizing their thoughts, which is great. I wish this is what we get, right? I feel like it's fantastic to touch base, and I'm hoping we do get it. But I don't know, it feels like it could have been done in this article. But we got probably the least amount of information if you look at the other two major Living Legend articles, right? So the main part to sort of zero in on is this: their desired lifespan of a hero. A hero's lifespan is relative to their win percentage of events that offer LL points. What do they think is a good lifespan? Ideally 15 to 20 months from the release, right? So a year to a year and a half to 2 years roughly. I also like how up here there are 16 adult heroes legal for class constructed so far this year. We've seen the introduction of 4 new heroes: Stravo, Dromai, Faye, and Icelander, and a farewelled 3 Stravo, right? So again, this is sort of the downside. Was he gone too quick? In this scenario, again, to achieve this desired lifespan, would not just heavy bans and erratas be better, so that he actually sees play and he actually sees use for the time frame that they themselves have specified. Then we have the metric, right, that they're sort of estimating for attaining LL. So if a hero is winning 10%, then it'll take about 40 months. If they win all the way to 50%, it will take a measly 8 months. So in other words, when a hero dominates the meta, and the majority of matchups are mirror matches, it will still take roughly 8 months for them to cycle out. Then we have the direct idea of the Living Legend system. So the Living Legend system shouldn't be acting as a safety valve, right? So while this is fundamentally true by the sheer nature of how the system works, it is not the purpose of the Living Legend system. Again, the purpose of the Living Legend system is to recognize sustained excellence of heroes that elegantly evolve the metagame over time. To be clear, the primary way we intend to address degenerate card interactions and or metagames when they occur is through the banned and suspended list, and not through heroes expedited to the Living Legend status. So, does it feel like this is still the main argument, right? Do they want to focus on banning and erratas and suspensions, or are they trying to expedite heroes? It's a valid question to ask. Again, on the top end, we haven't seen point changes as great as we have. The introduction of a lot more heroes, if they are to some degree viable, will slow down the rates for classic constructed. But of course, then you also have the other impacts of, again, the community growing, the competitive scene growing, that will fuel more points towards both aspects, Blitz and classic constructed. And the other sort of point I do want to ask when it comes to bans and suspensions, do you think they should be hero specific? Because obviously currently they fit the class bill, but as we saw with Azalea and Riptide, right, they were heavily impacted by bans and suspensions targeted at Lexi. And there are those two factors that are somewhat of an issue to me, right? So one, you have the Living Legend status essentially pulling away a ton of possibilities from the game, right? Depending on the cards printed, we won't get to see their interactions in, again, the main format. If Living Legend was brought up, or even just to, I don't know, like 30% of the scale of class constructed, then sure, but it's not. It is a side event. It is a side event that will be heavily dominated by, again, decks that should have seen heavy erratas, heavy bans, because, well, not only does it fit what they themselves were exemplifying, but it was clearly a deck so far above, and is still a deck so far above, indicated again by the Stravos at Worlds and the Living Legend competition. So here's the goal. They want to inject approximately 3,000 points into class constructed, 1,000 points per season or release, and 1,500 points into Blitz. So again, 1,500 would target 3 heroes, and then 3,000 would target 2 heroes for class constructed. So their goal, roughly, is every year 2 heroes from class constructed, 3 heroes from Blitz. Now, what we're seeing for Blitz is that's obviously going to accelerate greatly. And then for class constructed, again, depending how the meta lines up, right? If, again, 1 or 2 decks dominate, then they will be removed. But it's this hard angle again, right? What is a vibrant metagame? How many heroes do we want to see at major events? Because that is really what's going to impact all the points and all the calculations the most. Because you can hit the same life cycle, but it all depends on, again, the spread within what decks are actually viable at the top end and what decks you play. And between those two things, only one is directly controllable by LSS, right? They can help enable decks to be meta relevant. But at the end of the day, it will come down to what the players pick to play, right? There was a comment who put it beautifully. If everyone decided to play X hero, whether it's out of malice or that hero is simply just at the top of the field, they can heavily manipulate the Living Legend system. And then that leads us finally to the latest update we got, right? About what they hope to achieve, the point changes, and the idea of 15 new heroes, again, fleshing out the field of play to make up for the heroes leaving. So, in summary, these changes are intended to see the highest performing heroes move more quickly towards the Living Legend status. We'd like to remind everyone that a feature of Flesh and Blood's rotation model is that it only rotates heroes and signature weapon cards, while preserving the utility of a player's broader collection by either immediate transfer of those cards to an existing hero of the same class/talent, or future applications of those cards when a new hero is released that then picks up the class/talent mantle of the ascended hero. Again, there is a lot riding on the future. And to me, it just feels like the type of thing that you introduce and you work on after you have those elements completely fleshed out. Now, I'm not saying there isn't, a lot of heroes in the meta. And do we want to see the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, and then work our way back up? Yeah, could be interesting. But in terms of card utility, it is a heavy ask, right? To make this work. Because the hero you introduced, again, it can't be as powerful, but you don't want it to be severely weaker, because then the utility is lost. And it is just this fine balancing act that all we can do is wait and see. Leaving, of course, one more article, right? The Living Legend announcement that came out this week about Icelander for Class Constructed, and Kano and Kasai for Blitz. So again, 2 heroes gone from Blitz, 1 for Class Constructed. In terms of the leaderboard, Faye is next nearest to the top, then Dash and Dromai, and then for Blitz, right, it is going to be a tight noose across a bunch of heroes. Because again, there are so many points up for offer with the skirmish changes. But again, we see cards come off the suspended list. And again, it's curious to me, right? Because who is this for, right? We're not getting ice and heavy hitters, right? I highly doubt it. Next set has to be Arya, right? Because it has the majority of cards just in limbo. But again, we just don't know. Anyway, that is the summation of the history, right? And there is a lot to think about and wonder, and a lot of questions we could ask and pose. But the main and biggest one is this the right way? Or is there a better way? Only time will tell. Hope you enjoyed.